Today we will be identifying and writing proportions. So let's take a look at our first type of problem we'll end up seeing. What they're going to ask us to do is determine whether these two ratios are proportional or not. And so the way I'm going to end up doing that is one of two methods. And so I'm going to give you both methods here. We'll write down method number one is to take the two fractions and simplify. So we'll say reduce fractions. And if the two fractions are equal, we'll say if equal, then proportional. Then they are proportional. Well, the second method would be to take the two fractions and we'll go ahead and come up with a common denominator. So find the common denominator. And if that common denominator, once we find that common denominator, and if the numerators are the same, then the fractions are proportional. We'll say if the numerators, so the numerator is the number on top of the fraction, the denominator the one on the bottom. So if the numerators are equal, then proportional. Then they are proportional. So let's do a few problems, and we'll use both methods to check to see if they're proportional or not, and so you can determine whichever one you like the best. And so let's take the first one here. So 3/4, that's already reduced. So now what we need to do is take this 24 30-seconds and reduce it. So this is method one. So I'm going to take that 24 30-seconds and take out that common factor. So I see I can divide both the top and the bottom by 8. And I'll bring down this other 3/4, and when I do the division here, I end up with the same answer, 3/4. So those are proportional, they equal. And so method number two would just be to take those two fractions and make the denominators the same, just kind of like what I did here, but instead of reducing it, you'd multiply. So take that 3/4 and think of what number do we get, do we have to multiply the 4 by to make 32? Well, that number would be 8. So I'd want to multiply the top and the bottom by 8, because 4 times 8 would make 32, and that would have the same denominator. So I'll be able to compare the two fractions, looking at the numerators. So when I do that, I get 24 over 32. And so when we end up with the same numbers on the top and bottom of the fraction, that means the two fractions are proportional. And so again, you don't have to show your work both methods, just one method would do. So here it is for the next one, method number one. What I'm going to do is take that 5/6 and try to reduce it, but it's already reduced. So let's take the 15/18 and reduce that then. And so I see that the common factor here would be 3 between these two numbers, and I go ahead and do that division, and I end up with 5/6. So when the numbers are the same, we would say they're proportional. Well, that's method number one. Let's take a look at method number two. That would be to come up with a number that when I multiply by 6, I get 18. And in this case, it would be 3. So I'd multiply the top and the bottom by 3, and I'd come up with my equivalent fraction, so 15/18. And so when the two numbers, again, are equal, that means that they are proportional. And so we'll take a look at our next problem here, and it says that we have 10/12 and we have 20 30-seconds. So I'll go ahead and use method number one, and I'm going to reduce this fraction, take out the common factor, which is 2, and when I do that, I end up with a 5/6. And so I do the same thing with this next one, 20 over 32. Take out the common factor between these two numbers, and I see the biggest number here is 4. And so when I do that reducing, I end up with 5/8. These numbers are not the same, so that means they're not proportional. But again, you could use another method. Method number two would be to just come up with a common denominator, kind of like if you added the two fractions together. And so what I'll end up doing is looking at that 12, and you can come up with the lowest common denominator if you want to, or just multiply the other each by the other's denominator. But it would be a little faster if we came up with that common denominator. So let's look to see what's in common between these two numbers, and 4 is in common between the two numbers. So what I need to multiply the left-hand side by is 8. That's the other factor that the 12 is missing. Well, the 32 is missing that extra 3 in which 12 has. And so if I multiply across, let's see, the top of the fraction, the bottom of the fraction, the numerator and the denominator, I end up with 80/96. When I multiply the numerator and denominator on the next fraction, I end up with 60/96. So you can see these numbers are not the same. So when they're not the same, we say they're not proportional. So proportional means that the fractions will equal one another. We've got another type of problem that gives us a chart, and we have to come up with these missing numbers. So the best thing to do is look at the one that you do have. We got 4/6. So take that fraction and reduce it. That's the easiest thing. Or sometimes it's already reduced. Well, then you just do the next step. So my first step, though, is reducing the fraction. So I went ahead and reduced it, and I got 2/3. Well, look at the next number. Okay, how do I get the 3? Well, I already have a 3. And that means that the top number must be 2. It would be the number that we're missing right here. Because 2/3 would equal the same fraction I have right here. Well, the next one's a little tougher. Let's take a look at it. We've got 8, and then we've got this question mark. Okay, we're going to set it equal to this other fraction. So what you're thinking of is look at the numbers that you have. You have the numerators. So how did they go from 2 to 8? Well, what they did is they multiplied this by 4. So if I do 2 times 4, that equals 8. That's how they got that. Well, if I multiply the top by the 4, I need to also multiply the denominator by the 4 as well. And that'll give me the missing number. So 3 times 4 makes 12. So this missing number is 12. So 12 is the number that would go right there. Well, looking at the next problem, it says Jeremy earns $234 for 36 hours worth of work. So $234 for 36 hours worth of work. Miguel earns $288 for doing work for 40 hours. Are the pay rates of these two people proportional? Well, let's go ahead and use one of our methods. So one of the methods is reducing. The other method is to come up with a common denominator, and that's what I'm going to end up doing here. I see there's a common factor of 4, so I'm going to take out a 4. So I see 4 times 9 makes 36. Well, 4 times 10 makes 40, and 9 and 10 have no more common factors. Even though they can be reduced, they don't have a common factor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this fraction by the factor that the 36 is missing, which is 10. And this other fraction is missing a 9, so I'm going to multiply it by 9/9. And so multiplying by 10 is easy. I just add a 0, so it becomes 234 with a 0 at the end, so 2,340. 36 becomes 360. And I see if it equals. Well, I know the denominator is 360. That's how I came up with that value. Now I'd have to do 9 times the 288. Well, right away I see it doesn't, because I end up with a 2 for 72 for 8 times 9. Carry the 7. 9 times 8 is 72 again, plus the 7 makes 79. And then 9 times 2 is 18, plus the 7 ends up giving me 25. So 2,592 is not the same as 2,340. So they are not proportional. Well, let's take a look at the next problem. And again, so our reasoning here would be that, and you can, because you're going to end up having to explain using some sort of sentence to explain why these are not proportional. And so my reasoning here, I would say they're not proportional because the fractions are not equivalent. And then I can state this, that the 2,340 over 360 is not equal to the 2,592 over the 360. So this would be my reasoning here, because it does ask us to explain, and they're going to want us to reuse a complete sentence to explain that. And the next one, it says a recipe for fruit punch calls for 2 cups of pineapple juice for every 3 cups of orange juice. So let's write that down. 2 pineapple, I'll just write pineapple or just pine for pineapple, for 3 cups of orange juice. Alright, so now we want to write an equivalent ratio to find how many cups of pineapple juice should be used with 12 cups of orange juice. So what they're asking is 12 cups of orange juice, how many cups of the pineapple? Well, all we're going to do is see how did they go from the orange juice, the 3 cups, to 12 cups. Well, what they did is they multiplied by 4. 3 times 4 equals 12. That's how they got that. So that means that we'll need to multiply the 2 by 4 as well, the same number. So 2 times 4 makes 8. So it would be 8 cups of pineapple juice. Well, let's take a look at the next one, and it asks us, it says the ratio of adults to children at a picnic is 4 to 5. So 4 to 5 could be written a few different ways. We could see it this way with the colon in between, or you could write it as a fraction. Now, I'm going to use the fraction form. So 4, and it says children, adults to children. So adults is 4, and the children is 5. And so what we'll end up doing is trying to come up with an equivalent ratio for this. So let's take a look at the first. It says the total number of people is between 20 and 30. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and multiply this fraction by 2 over 2 to see how many people there are. Now notice 4 to 5 means that there's 9 people. There's 9 people here out of if I just have the fraction of 4 to 5. Well, the picnic has between 20 and 30. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply by 2 and see what I get. I get 8 over 10. And so I end up with 8 adults and 10 children. And then if I go ahead and find out how many people that is, that makes 18 people because I just added the 8 and 10 together. Well, that's not between 20 and 30, so I need to keep on going. So let's do the next one. Let's try 4 to 5, and this time I'm going to multiply by 3 over 3. Well, that makes 12 over 15. So I'd have 12 adults to 15 children. And when I go ahead and add those numbers together, that ends up giving me 27 people. And so that is between the numbers of 20 and 30. If I did the next one, it would be something over 27 people. So I'm not going to go any further than that. So my answer is right here, 12 adults to 15 children. So remember, when they ask you to explain, make sure you explain in words there and give me an explanation. In this case, it was not proportional because the fractions are not equivalent. And then the work is shown above here where I had to end up coming up with that common denominator. Or you could end up saying how you change those fractions or you reduce the fractions and you saw that they were not the same either. Well, those are the types of problems that you're going to see on tonight's homework. Good luck.